Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Commune podcast. Today we'll be talking about combat in Skyward Sword. With me, I have Daniel
Hi, hi.
and Greg.
Yellow?
Before we start talking about the game, how have you guys been doing? It's been a while since we've had a podcast like this.
I've been doing all right. I got married.
Yeah, what the hell? You didn't tell me about that.
Congratulations. Welcome to the club.
Thank you. Well, you're one of the few people of the internet who's had the pleasure of meeting my wife.
Yeah. Daniel, how have you been?
Yeah, I've been good. Pretty busy with work, but no, otherwise good. I feel like I'm catching up on my writing and still, playing some games, so that's good.
You have you made some tweets about books that are getting ready to be published.
Yeah, that's right. I guess there's two. One is Adventures in Games Analysis, which is a like a zine, book of zine thing that I'm doing, which I've been working on for ages, and yeah, like 5 years now. It's gone under so many revisions. Like I was originally going to publish it back in 2014. It was ready to go,
Oh,
but I went back and pretty much did the whole thing again.
wow.
So there's that, and then there's a another book on arcade racing game design, which almost I've almost finished it. So there's only a few chapters left, and then yeah, so I'm hoping to release those both at the start of next year.
Wow. Man, I knew you've been digging deep into racing games, but I didn't know you had a whole nother book ready to go.
Yeah, it won't be like a very large book, probably just maybe about 100 pages or something like that. But
for
yeah,
for most people, that's a lot. How many other people write 100 pages talking about games?
Well, 100 publishable pages.
Yeah.
yeah, I think that's the thing. I think the quality of what I'm writing is a lot better than before. So I'm really, I mean, like what I wrote before was great, but I think I've learned a lot over the last few years, and I'm really excited about sharing everything with you guys.
Nice.
Awesome. Can't wait to read it. Alright, so now we can get started with Skyward Sword's combat. Skyward Sword is very different from other Zelda games, so I think the first thing we need to get out of the way is, just an overview of all the changes between Skyward Sword and prior 3D Zelda games.
So a lot like other 3D Zeldas, you can lock onto enemies to focus on one at a time. You have a shield, you have a sword, and there are some items which may have secondary uh, properties for combat. Um, but the most well, so those are all the similarities. The major difference comes in uh, the inputs for your sword. Um, in prior Zeldas, you could get different kinds of sword slashes by performing certain combos or by using your sword in different contexts. Um, for example, there are some dodge moves in Wind Waker where you like do a dance around the enemy, and then you can kind of manually trigger those in uh, Twilight Princess, and all that's kind of they took a different tack with Skyward Sword where um, you get 9 different sword moves uh, in yeah 9 different sword moves, um, but they're all accessed through different motion gestures rather than different contexts or setups. Um, while standing still, depending on how you slash the or how you gesture the Wii remote, Link will slash the sword in a different direction. Um, so that's the biggest change that uh, you have access to a wide variety of different sword slashes just from the base context without having to go into any uh, combos or setups.
Yeah, it's all very much based around the nine cardinal directions in which you can slash your sword, and they're all based around the motion control gestures. And I guess outside of the Sword and Shield, a number of the other um, items that you can use, like the bomb and the arrow, they also include motion control as well. So I guess the way you interface with the mechanics is also a little bit different.
Just an aside, I thought it was kind of funny that when Wii Sports came out, the you know all the games are great, but the one everybody played was Wii Bowling, and then Wii Bowling found its way into Skyward Sword.
Although if you ask me, the one I played the most was Wii Boxing, but that found its way into ARMS. Anyway, some other changes. These are some of the more subtle ones, but dashing and running up walls was implemented in Skyward Sword,
Oh yeah.
and with that came the introduction of the stamina system, which for the first time you could not just spin the circle around and hit the button to do a quick spin. You had to swing both the Wii Remote and the nunchuck, but at the cost of stamina. So you can't just spam quick spins like you could in other 3D Zeldas. Now you're limited.
Well, in other 3D Zeldas, wasn't there a cooldown or something,
Not
or
on
a
the quick
charge time?
spin.
Okay.
In Ocarina of Time and Wind Waker, if you just held the button and let go, it would cost magic. In Twilight Princess, you would have to charge it, but at no cost of magic. But in all of them, you could always just spin the circle and push B. Except Wind Waker, I think you had to spin it twice. But
Yeah, I think there was a special attack in Wind Waker where like Link would spin around like 8 times or something, and then he'd be dizzy at the end.
yeah, that's still the only one that you have to do by charging. But otherwise, the quick spin was featured in all of them. Skyward Sword is the first to not have it, and is also now the one that features stamina, which puts a limit on your most powerful attack. It also features the introduction of the, vertical spin attack, as well as the Skyward Strike. So you now, regardless of health, have access to a sword beam, so long as you're willing to charge it by pointing the sword straight up.
It's interesting because the uh, some of those new editions have their own committal to them. So the Skyward Beam, you have to actually um, raise the sword up for a short period of time, and then with the with the dash or the sprint, there's an energy meter which is attached to that as well.
Yeah, it also makes it so that it's harder to run away from encounters. Another feature, an addition. Oh, the Skyward Sword also gives you a way of being able to hit enemies that are still in the air. So whereas in prior Zeldas, if you didn't have a bow or any projectile weapon, you kind of would just have to wait for the keys to come to you so you could hit it. But in Skyward Sword, you can just take them out in the air whenever you want. If you get that time to charge it and hit them out before they come close, you can do it. So I thought that was cool.
And just another small thing with the sprint and also the sprint. If you sprint into a wall, you can a link will start to hop up that wall. It's generally not used in combat, but there are some situations, such as when you're taking on the large moblins with the big shields. You can actually sprint towards their shield and then like jump up over the top of them, which is really neat. But generally, once you're in, like once you're locked on, you don't have access to the sprint and other things. So I guess some of the new movement options with the sprint are more so for perhaps smaller enemies or um, when you're moving around and when you're not locked on and you're not sort of committed into a one-on-one sword fight.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
It's worth noting if you want to um, if you want to go into a sprint out of attacking, then Link needs to put away his equipment. And if you want to cancel out of running into an attack, you either have to quit running and pull out your sword, or if you attack while running, he goes into a jumping slash animation, which is quite a big commitment.
Yeah, that's a good
Yeah.
point too. Yeah.
Link goes into the jump attack. I guess actually that brings up the one thing that was a little unfortunate, which is that Link cannot. The sword directions do not matter when you do a jump attack. So you could stab it, you can swing it horizontally. He's always going to do that same, vertical slice when you do the dash attack. But oh well.
Well, I why does that bug you?
Well, I mean, when the name of the game is look at all the ways you can swing your sword, and you find that one where it's like, oh wait, except here, it kind of sucks. I kind of would have liked to have been able to, dash and swing horizontally, kind of like you can in Breath of the Wild, so you can just run into a crowd of enemies and just smack them all away.
I feel like that's why I liked it. That it um because you can't just run in and do whatever slash you want. You're kind of locked into a more clean setup.
Yeah, I can see that. So one of the more subtle details about Skyward Sword that's different is how they had to tune the camera. I guess I, I guess that was my cue to start talking about that, but it does impact the gameplay. Whereas in other Zeldas, the camera doesn't actually move a whole lot, so you're free to literally go in front, besides, and around the enemy, even turn it to sort of like a 2D side scroller, like in Zelda 2. In Skyward Sword, it is more stuck behind your back so that you can get that clear view to see which angle you are holding your sword and swinging it. With that also comes, that it's actually a little easier for enemies to sort of hit into your blind side, or you actually have a bigger blind side behind Link, whereas in the other 3D Zelda games, uh, that blind side would not be there because Link would actually be more further into the camera, further away from the camera, my bad, than it is in Skyward Sword. So you could see more of what's around him, whereas in Skyward Sword, like, nope, can't see. You cannot see much of what's behind you.
Just as a practical example, in Sky Keep, there's an iteration of the four-armed skeleton boss,
Mm-hmm.
and he's surrounded by zombie bokoblins.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the zombie bokoblins will like distract your lock on. So I found in order to deal with the boss effectively, um, I had to avoid using lock on, which um, which meant I had to take more care in how I maintained the camera, because the camera's that thing that's gonna help you, like the thing that's gonna give you the proper feedback for reading. Okay, now he's holding his swords vertically. I got to do this. If you're not locked on, then you're kind of free to walk around and get into places where it's not super easy to read how the boss may be holding his equipment.
Yeah, that's a very good point to bring up. I think another detail with, well, actually, Greg brought it up about being able to see the direction that the enemy's swinging in. Well, it actually exists in prior Zelda games, but using the shield. Well, actually, wait, the shield breaking is something totally new, but the shield to parry was something that was in Twilight Princess. You could hit the R button to do a shield bash, which could have been used to parry. You can't do a helm splitter. No, there's none of that, and you can't bash them in the face, but you can use it to stave off attacks while sustaining no shield damage.
And in a lot of contexts, like your standard bokoblin, for instance, um, it offers like a breadth of interplay where a bokoblin holds his two knives up, and you can either read how he's holding it and slash so that he doesn't block you, or you can wait for him to attack, do a shield bash, and that acts as a parry, and from there he's wide open and you can attack him however you want.
Mm-hmm.
So I found that often the game was designed so that I don't think you ever need to do the shield bash, but that it offers another option for how to interact with enemies.
Right. Even enemies like the Centrobes, which I guess we can talk about later when we get to the enemies they don't require it, but it is a lot harder and riskier when you have to reflect projectiles using your sword instead of the shield. So, in addition to the shields breaking in this game, you also have wood and iron varieties. What did you guys make of that change?
I don't know. I wasn't. So you can buy, several varieties of the shield, wooden, and then you kind of, find more elemental items in the environment, and then you take them um, to a guy on Skyloft, and he will, construct new shields that are stronger and new swords that are better. Um, yeah, I don't think that I can't think of many situations where the different types of equipment really factored into the gameplay much in terms of the shape of the shield. I mean, obviously, I think earlier on, there's a shield which is like impervious to fire or something like that, whereas the wooden shield obviously gets burnt. So that's
Hmm.
something I think early on you have to consider. But generally, once you get up to one of the stronger shields, I'm not sure which one it is, but like I guess the second best shield. Once you get there, then you can kind of forget about it.
I thought it
Yeah.
was pretty lame that I didn't have enough money for the steel shield early on, so I was walking into Fire Sanctuary with the wooden shield. I accidentally fall in the lava, and now I don't have a shield. Like that, just the punishment there seems a little steep. And I was definitely happy when I got to the regenerating shield.
Sorry. I think they probably needed like um, a bit of a hard lock there, just to communicate to players that the shields are important and they need to, you get the right shield. But I guess that doesn't actually play out later on in the game. In saying that though, I do like the idea of your shields breaking um, and how you can be in the middle of a battle and your shield will break and then you have to improvise and you have to work around that weakness. I
Hmm.
think that's neat. Yeah, I quite like the implications of that.
Yeah. We all saw how that eventually led to the change that they made in Breath of the Wild from that instance. I think another thing that having the shields break do is encourage, not necessarily force, but encourage players to parry more, which is much more interesting than just not taking any damage if you don't do anything, as long as you're locked on.
What's what I've found regarding that is the parry. So if you're going to time the parry incorrectly, it's generally a good idea to time it incorrectly early. You can be like it looks like Link is totally done parrying, and then an enemy's attack bounces off. Um,
Yeah.
and so by giving the shield health, it's almost like if you parry so incredibly early that you miss the parry and the enemy attacks your shield straight on, then your shield takes damage. So it's kind of like if you shield too late, or if you parry too late, you take damage. If you parry too early, your shield takes damage.
Hmm. Yeah. I don't remember if I counted it correctly, but I think there was like 30 frames or something like 20 frames of a window for the parry to work.
Is that and is that almost a second?
That is almost a second or 2/3 of a second. I sometimes it's hard for me to tell because the animation or in even the little particle effects doesn't totally convey how long that thing actually is. But yeah, it's a pretty big window. It's a much harsher, arguably too harsh in Breath of the Wild. I don't know if it's worth talking about the bird in this one just yet because I mean technically that is combat and there is a boss that you go through with the bird. Do you want to talk about that as well?
I guess it is maybe not worth discussing in detail, but there are lots of alternative modes of method, or Jesus Christ. There are lots of alternative modes of walking around or movement in Skyward Sword. Link can operate. the flying beetle, and the flying beetle controls are very similar to the bird and the swimming controls. Um, and the swimming controls have their own like fights where you can knock into certain fish enemies. The bird, of course, can fight other enemies on the overworld or that one boss. And even on top of that, you also have a crawling mode where you get centipede mini bosses. And so those modes uh, aren't as rich as the base combat, but it's worth noting that the game does have like a lot of variety in fighting.
There is actually one last move we did not talk about, but it might be one of the most superfluous actions in Skyward Sword. That is, you can actually still roll in the game.
Yeah,
Remember
is that only
rolling?
for interacting with trees?
It um it yeah, you can hit the trees to knock bugs off of it. You really just soar right past the enemies when you do it, and rolling also costs us stamina in addition to having to dash to be able to access it. So rolling, yeah, I was not particularly useful in combat and doesn't actually interact with the enemy. So there's one that was the one last thing that was changed on Skyward Sword is that you can only do it out of dashing, and it also uses a bigger chunk of stamina, kind of like if you did a spin attack. And in that case, its utility in combat was, you know, much harder to utilize at all. You guys have any thoughts on the role in Skyward Sword and its implications on combat or anywhere else in the
No,
game?
I don't think it really has much of a purpose in combat.
I would be curious, just not for any practical reason, um, if how it impacts your hitbox and how you might use the modified hitbox to style off of enemies, if at all. But that's not
That
really
is true.
a super interesting question.
Yeah, would it be tricky to pull off?
Yeah.
The next question is how do Skyward Sword's motion controls change the nature of boss battles? So not just the regular enemies, but the boss battles.
Yeah, I think, well, I guess one of the things with the combat system, more generally, is that because it uses the motion controls, um, the the sort of interactions that you have with enemies, I guess, are much more like sword fighting duels, and so a number of the bosses in the game, well, yeah, probably a good half of the bosses are um, just one-on-one sword fights. And so, yeah, and so there's quite a few bosses like that. The mini bosses at the start, Stalfos, Lizarfos, the pirate, Dreadfuse, uh, Gurahim, I think is his name,
Yeah.
the main villain in the game. You know, you have sword fights with him. So, uh, how do you say that? Koloktos also has a little bit of that as well. So yeah, so many of the boss battles are based around sort of sword fighting gameplay, and that goes back. Those battles draw on that sort of that core system of the nine different striking angles. Using your shield to block and so on, and reading your opponents and
Yeah.
responding to their moves.
I also think the even regarding the more item-based bosses, such as Scaldera, I mean it still works this similar to how it would in a traditional 3D Zelda, where your bomb is thrown in an arc and you hit him. But the way how you have to hit his eye and his eye moves around his body, so you have to utilize the different strikes in order to continue hitting him. That's another example of how it's changed.
Yeah, that's right. There's some bosses that are purely focused on the cardinal and direction, sword fighting interplay, and then others that are sort of conventional Zelda bosses that are sort of augmented in a small way with the motion controls.
Yeah,
I think
the
the best balance comes out in the Scorpion boss, Moldarok,
mhm.
where he has these two pincers that rotate and um, create basically blocks where you can't. Um, how do I phrase this? Um, Basically, he orients his claws to block his weak spot, um, and so he'll turn his claws every now and then, and you'll have to read and swing your sword appropriately. But he also has phases where he burrows underground, and you have to blow him out using the gust bellows. So I thought that was a great balance where he's moving through this dynamic, messy sand pit, and I have to blow him out using the gust bellows, and then he swaps into this mode where now I'm reading how his claws are blocking his weak spot, and I play into this normal cardinal direction sword interplay.
Mhm. Yeah, actually, now that you bring that up, Coloctus is kind of the same way where during his first phase, actually both phases, he has your interaction where you use your whip to rip off his arms, and then it goes back into sword fight mode where you take one of his swords and hack away at him.
Yeah,
Yeah, and then even in that battle, he can, with his I guess his projectile attacks, they can knock out some of the pillars um, within the arena. So I think within Moldarak with its, oh sorry, Moldarak is the the scorpion boss. With Moldarak and its sort of dynamic dust, and with Coloctus and its the fact that you can pull up its arms and use it against him, and he can damage the environment. These bosses have sort of new dynamic elements that fit in alongside the motion controls, and they work and they help make the boss battles more dynamic and engaging and interesting overall.
Hmm.
I
Oh,
think
and then there's also the one on the flying whale's back as well, and that's I guess that's not it doesn't have a dynamic element, but there's sort of a like an aerial pursuit followed by a conventional boss battle, which is kind of nice how they've added in like those phases and the fact that you're attacking um, on the back of a giant creature, which is neat as well.
it
Yeah, how
honestly, sorry, it honestly reminded me of a in space shooters. There's the trope of a battleship level where the entire level is just you flying the ship around um, one singular boss, and then the quote unquote boss fight is actually you just blowing up a portion of the battleship, and that's kind of what you do with Levias there.
another interesting thing about the Levi's boss was that it got you to more deliberately aim your sword to reflect in left and right to actually hit his ears before you hit his head, and he would even try to weave his head in order to avoid which direction you would reflect the projectile back at him. I thought that was cool.
It's tennis.
It's almost like Wii Tennis.
It is.
I think so Scaldiera, which is that in the Fire Sanctuary, the volcanic rock boss. Tantalus, which is the boss with a very simple design, which has the tentacles in its hair,
Hmm.
and the imprisoned. Um, these three bosses, they don't really make use of the motion controls very much, and they really could have been in any other Zelda. Actually, I think Tantalus in particular, just having it on the pirate ship, it kind of reminds me of the final boss battle in Phantom Hourglass as well. So
Yeah,
But yeah, they don't really make use of the motion control. So I guess there's sort of a variety there. There's boss battles that are purely focused on that motion control, sword fighting interplay. There's those which don't use any motion controls or don't use very much, and they are more like traditional Zeldas. And then there's ones where they they use motion controls and they sort of augment the existing gameplay and make what would be in a prior Zelda game a bit more interesting and engaging.
I just want to clarify one thing. Scaldera, earlier when I said the part where you start knocking off, pieces of those rocks on him, and his eye starts moving around more and more. That's when the motion controls really come into play.
On Colossus, which is the um, I don't know what kind of creature you'd say. It looks like a kettle. Looks like a golden kettle. Um, I I remember when I was first fighting this boss, I found it really tricky because I'd use my whip and the whip wouldn't actually attach to his arms to pull them off, and I couldn't figure it out. And then eventually I figured out that the area around the other grapple points, where you grapple onto it, um, they have like some kind of protruding element which when you flick on the whip, you have to flick it in a certain way so that it moves through sort of 3D space around those protrusions.
Yeah.
Um, and there's another instance in the game where it's like that too. Oh no, so I'm thinking of in Federation Force in that is the boss battle with the giant echidna-looking creature in the open area where there's a similar thing going on where there's protrusions that that you have to lead your shots around. It's the same kind of thing here, and I thought it was really cool. And after that boss battle, I really started focusing on how I was angling on the whip and how its trajectory would move in 3D space and how it's such a small um, bit of nuance, but it's really clever how it plays into sort of higher level gameplay, you could say.
One remaining comment that I had about the boss was the well, actually, your third question was about the imprisoned fight, so I might as well get to it now. Is that
Mm-hmm.
the directional sword swing? Because he has, his little three toes. It definitely emphasizes more those horizontal strikes, but also because the way he is stepping, you have to typically backflip over or even jump forward without doing a jump attack sometimes to not have those waves hit you while still hitting his remaining toes. And that's another one where the having more control over how you aim the swing of your sword affects combat. Whereas in other Zeldas, it might be a little more tricky just because, I mean, you still do have that directional swinging, but it requires you inputting uh, the control stick in the direction you want to swing and then hitting the button in order to do it.
You said something about jumping over the shockwaves or something like that.
Yep. Uh,
What do you mean
technic.
by that?
Well, I mean, technically, you can jump in this game. If you lock onto something, push forward, tap A, that's a jump.
So you can actually um, use that move to jump over the shockwaves that he makes. On the third time that you encounter him, when he steps, he'll put out the shockwaves. And so you're saying that you can actually use that jumping slash technique to jump over the shockwaves and not be hit by them.
That's right.
Oh my god! Jeez,
Wow,
I wish I
it
knew
seems
that
like
before.
it'd be easier just to use the dodge jump, right?
I don't know if the side hop takes you high enough off the ground. The backflip definitely does. But yeah,
But then you'd be backflipping
yeah,
sort of into the shockwave, which is moving out. Yeah,
That boss in general was an exercise in frustration where it didn't click with me. I didn't know what to do.
it
I
is.
think it's probably the worst part of the game, to be honest. And I suppose that frustration that you mentioned, Greg, was kind of perpetuated by the fact that I did I want to say a 3 heart run, but actually in Skyward Sword, I think you start with like 6 hearts, but I didn't
Yeah.
get any heart pieces or any full hearts till the end of the game. And I especially the third form of the imprisoned, I thought was harder than the final boss battle,
Oh
Huh.
yeah.
and it was just super frustrating.
Can you use the arrows on his toes?
Yeah.
That might be the way to
Yeah,
do it.
but it's kind of it's a bit slow and ineffective. I think that
Oh.
it's you can get a lot more done if you're up close and just spamming your sword strikes. But yeah, and the problem I found is so it's hard to move around him because his footsteps emit these shockwaves, and so the timing that you actually have between his footsteps is not great. So well, I guess there's two things here. Like there's he's putting one foot in front of the other, and so therefore but his steps aren't that far apart. So when you're moving towards one foot, the shock waves of the other foot are still like you still have to work around them. And then because he's in his third form, he walks faster than in his other forms. It means that after he's put his foot down and the shockwave is cleared, he's already basically ready to take the next step. And so you have a very limited window of time in which you can rush in and attack. And so it's a really tight window. And at the same time, you've got this, he's a giant boss. And so his legs sometimes obscure the action. And then you can really only approach it from sort of 180 degrees because he's walking along sort of a parallel with the edge of this circular um, environment or the circular staircase, and so you can really only approach it from the left hand side because if you approach it from the right and then something bad happens, you can get knocked back and then you'll fall down to the floors below, which pretty much for the third time that you take him on means that you're pretty like you should just give up. And so the timing window is strict. The area that you have to approach him is really strict, and the camera isn't. Well, it's not that the camera is bad. It's just that because of the fact that it's a giant boss, it often obscures on the camera. And so yeah, it's a very strict boss, and there's a lot of annoying elements in there, and that makes it quite frustrating.
Also, that it's timed.
So and the only reason I know like all those details that I just said is because I tried. So I spent ages doing it and I failed like several times. I'm like, "Argh." So I thought I'd note down all of the things that made me angry. Whereas like on the final boss battle, it's like as soon as I learned what to do, like I beat him. That's it.
Yeah, I was try harding it on the final boss because I still had low hearts and I wanted to beat him really fast because I got super excited when I found out that you could just parry him twice and then hit him a bunch afterwards.
Is that how that works? If you parry him twice without hitting him?
Oh no, the reason you have to parry him twice is because unlike other enemies, he does not stagger when you parry him. So he attacks, you parry the first one, but he's still going, so he just attacks again if you're still too close. And if you parry that second one, he's open, and so then I just, slash
Is
away at him.
is this first or second demise?
First.
In first demise, he's definitely open after the first. Like you can, if you parry, you have enough time to hit him once, and then he staggers. But then if you have enough time exactly for one sword strike, and then your second one he's gonna block. What I couldn't figure out was exactly when he goes into the lumped over state.
I don't know how many hits you do to get him into the lumped over state, but I do know that in the first time he went to attack me. When I saw him doing that second attack, I'm like, oh no, I gotta parry this one too, because I thought it was too soon to attack. I think another finer detail in Skyward Sword is how you can. Well, actually, this may not be true. It could just be that the sword is that fast. Because I believe this is the fastest in the 3D Zeldas that Link can swing his sword. But what I assumed is that you can actually cancel a sword slash into a parry. I might have checked that, or it's just that Link swings his sword so fast that I still have time to parry after hitting Demise, well, just as he's about to hit me.
I'd be curious.
Yeah.
I've definitely noticed during Demise the windows were small enough that I think I was trying it the opposite way. I think if you do a parry and then a sword slash during the parry animation, it like buffers the sword slash and just does it when the parry's over.
Oh, that's okay. Yeah, it probably does. Or actually, I don't know.
It's hard to tell because obviously the sword strike is on the negative edge of you swaying around the remote, so uh, it's hard to know for sure.
I think one of the coolest things in that fight was being able to do a lightning skyward strike and then collide it with his own skyward strike. That was super cool.
I forgot about that. I was working on Demise right up to this chat, and I I beat Skyward Sword when it came out, but I just couldn't remember how to kill that final boss. So I looked it up and did a facepalm.
You just fight him.
Well, it seemed like he wasn't taking damage in second Demise.
Oh, right, yeah. Because in the second form, you have to do your epic finish,
Yeah.
and man, it's epic. He got back up twice before he would finally stay down long enough for me to kill him.
Oh, so I actually can't remember that much about Demise because I spent more time on the not the Girahim battle, but the one before that, um, which is against the swarm of moblins, which seemed to be a very uncharacteristic Zelda boss battle.
Yeah, it was actually given a name. I think it's just called the Horde.
Yeah. Well, the wiki calls it Horde Battle.
Okay. Yeah. All I know is that I believe it is in the boss rush you do with the.
It is, yeah, it is.
So it's like, oh, they considered it a boss, which is cool because that's like one of my favorite action set pieces in the game. Was just like, yeah, just fight them all.
See, what I found interesting about it was that um, the way that they layered the different enemies together.
Mhm.
So, in particular, they had like the regular moblins, and then um, they had the archers who would sort of come in from the sides, and so you had that interesting like sort of like a mosh pit with these sort of snipers just outside that you have to keep an eye on. But then later on, they'd also have like the moblins who toss bombs as well, and so that was
Yeah.
like a lot of fun too. And but I think just the pure number and the effect on the game's performance, like the frame rate, really was quite uncharacteristic of Nintendo.
Oh, I didn't realize any frame. I guess I just didn't allow enough of them to be on screen for that to happen. Because I would always
Yeah.
just kill anything that came at me.
Uh, for me, I assumed they would spawn infinitely, so whenever I could, I would just chain the stamina berries until I got to a wall. So I never really noticed any frame rate hiccups either.
Hmm.
Yeah, because they sort of do that like darkness, so you can't actually see that far ahead, which is
Yeah.
one thing I noticed, and probably how they loaded in so many enemies because they're not actually loading in, you know, all the ones that come at you. They're only loading them in as they need to within a set distance. The
Hmm.
other
Hmm.
so the other interesting thing about that is they introduce the bomb one. I think they changed the behavior of the one that blows a horn because it actually like when it's blowing a horn, it starts running away from you, which normally they don't do that. Whenever they blow the horn, they usually just stand there and don't move.
Huh.
For whatever reason, they changed it in that one, so they're actually running away from you. It's like, whoa, that's different. And I think they do call in more enemies, so I also assumed it was infinitely spawning until you get to the end, because it sure felt that way. They also layer in the Moblins, the Stalfos, the Archers, and then they completely change the behavior of the Blue Blokobin. You guys saw that, right?
So his role in that fight is to run behind the wall, and then you need to like coax him out, right?
I don't know. I don't know if it's to run behind the wall, but he does run away from you. Cause so
Mm.
his what his behavior is. Normally, a blue Bokoblin is exactly the same as a red Bokoblin. It just takes 5 hits instead of 3. But in this
Yeah.
fight, the blue Bokoblin will run away from you, and it can outrun you even when you're dashing at it. So it's actually really hard to hit. And once it gets a certain distance away, it'll then do this sort of like uh, dash slice. Like it'll just like lunge at you and then slice at you.
Oh, it's sort of like it's got the is it the Pegasus boot or am I
Yeah,
right in saying that? Is that what you're talking about, Adrian?
it's not like the Pegasus boot because the Pegasus boot he just holds the sword out forward and just runs with it like he's jousting. But in this one, he's more like Demise. Demise does the exact same thing. He like sort of like floats at you and then swings once he gets near you.
Okay, sure, sure.
So he's more like that. So for whatever reason, they gave him a homing dash attack, which is not at all how those enemies normally behave. And it was actually kind of interesting having that more indirect enemy.
It was definitely hard to read that going on while also having a million bokoblins on top of you.
Yeah, and because this is Skyward Sword, they don't play nice. Just because they're not on the camera doesn't mean he's not going to hit you when you're not looking at him. So you got to make him a priority. Yeah, I guess this naturally transitions into Skyward Sword's combat and its effect on the enemies. So yeah, let's talk about our favorite enemies.
Sure. Well, actually, just on that more generally, that I think, um, you know, we're talking before about the cardinal direction attacks, and I mean, it's not that Link can only attack in one of nine directions. He can actually move his sword. Well, you can move your sword as you wish,
Hmm.
mostly, but it's that the enemies are all designed around that around those nine directions, which sort of makes interfacing with them very clean. But I
Yeah,
think at the same time, it also um, just that core combat, like the swordplay, combat with the shield bash, the sword, the different swipes, being able to side hop and jump backwards. I think that by the end of the game, well, I guess especially in the last part of the game, it kind of personally I found that it sort of got a bit tiresome, and really the only direction in which they can take, I guess there's really only two directions which they took to expand that core sword fighting gameplay. One is to have enemies like Girahim, like the Stalfos, the Lizarfos, and the pirates, which become increasingly difficult over the different iterations. So those enemies, they all their ability to respond to you and fight back becomes stronger over time, and so the back and forth becomes more exciting, and over the course of the game. So that's one way that they expand that core sword fighting gameplay. The other way is that with the other enemies, they just sort of layer them together, where you have to do multiple strikes in different ways to defeat the enemies. So there's a really good example with the BMOS, which is like the totem pole with the three structures on it. So it's like a totem pole with an eye at the top, and when the eye sees you, it'll fire its beam at you, and then you use your sword bash technique to deflect on the beam, which stuns it. Then you can run over and you can horizontally slash out the bottom two layers, and then you can do a forward strike to straight into the eye. And so that's an enemy which has more sort of layers to it, more it's a connected series of interactions. And so, really, it's sort of those two directions that it can develop that core gameplay, either um, making the interactions connected in a series or having stricter, more responsive enemies that can block and shield you and so on.
Yeah. This was actually one of my later questions, but there was this like as I got towards the end of the game, like Skyward Sword definitely seemed to either have been it was getting stale. I mean, the game had enough forward momentum for me to finish the game and be like, yeah, that was great, but I could already see before that point where it's like these areas aren't quite hitting as hard as it was when I first began the game, and it was because they were using a lot of it. Like I put in the link to show you all the enemies in the game, but you realize by the time you get to I would say less than two-thirds, you've already seen all these enemies, and
Mm,
the new
yeah.
ones that they do introduce, they're more specific. Like Moldorms, those are enemies that are uniquely underground.
The Metal Shield Moblin.
Yeah, Metal Shield Moblin, which means you can't cut his shield, but you still have the ability to run up the shield and attack him.
Especially the moblins. I think there's too many moblins, and um, uh, I mean, I think the range is fine. Like the different types is great. But I think that they just put too many of them in the game.
Yeah, that's and it's also kind of my same criticism with Breath of Wild, although Breath of Wild is much more dynamic, but you still get that feeling there of you fight a lot of the same enemy, and the different having different colors is not enough to really distinguish them. There are a few differences in the behavior between red bokoblins and blue bokoblins, namely that did you know the blue bokoblin has a jump attack?
No, because he always just died too soon.
Yeah. I, and this is yeah, because it takes him a long time to do it, and he's so vulnerable that it's like you should have been doing that a little bit farther away. In fact, it makes me wonder why didn't that one you use in the horde? Why wasn't that just the way it was from the start? Because I guess what I'm realizing now is that the new enemies that you see, which are the bomb throwing bokoblins and the blue bokoblin that tends to keep its distance from you and waits to strike. It's like those are behaviors that probably should have happened way earlier in the game.
I agree. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, because it's like at about halfway through, or from thereabouts, it starts getting stale, and then you get to this like to the horde battle, and you're like, oh wow, there's these new Bobbikins and Moblins that I hadn't seen before, and now and now I've almost finished the game. Like, where were they
Yeah,
before?
yeah,
Um, and I think they could have easily fit in some of the open environments, for example. They would have fit in well. But
yeah. I agree as well. They would have been such a nice fit when because this is actually another one of my issues with Sky. It especially hurts when you go back and forth. When I now that I've gone to Breath of the Wild and went back to Skyward Sword, is the number of enemies in the overworld sometimes is a little small, as in they're not grouped up as much, which is weird because they specifically do that thing where they blow a horn and call other enemies to them. But
wait, so you're
sometimes,
talking about are you talking about Breath of the Wild has too few enemies on the overworld,
no,
or
no, no,
Skyward
no,
Sword?
Skyward Sword,
Okay, yep.
because I mean Breath of the Wild, you go to one of those camps, there's like 11 of those bastards in there. Whereas in Skyward Sword, you are hard pressed to find five of them together, or even four.
But I think in Skyward Sword they're hard. Like they take more of a time investment to kill because
That's
you
true.
actually have to face them, one by one. So
Yeah. I think this also leads to another difference, which is that becomes less and less so the case because you get those sword upgrades. So you eventually start killing them in like one or two hits, and then the blue
true.
bokoblins actually start taking three hits, so they literally transform into the red bokoblin just with a different color, and the red bokoblins basically just become this, super weak enemy. And I think the green ones take, shoot, I don't remember the numbers now.
But yeah, and the way it unfolds is that it actually the amount of time you have to well, I guess the number of hits or the investment that you have to spend with each enemy doesn't. I mean, it doesn't really change. There's just newer enemies with more colors or in different colors, but you still have to spend a bit of time engaging with them, and that the types of interactions that you can have with those enemies don't change, and they're so frequent.
There's I guess one thing to qualify that though um, would be the Song of Hero quests, where those all, well, you might debate how worthwhile the variation is there, but they all give a different context for interacting with the enemies. Where um, in Farron Woods, uh, well, actually, I think in Farron Woods you don't have any enemies. You only have the fish enemies with the giant foreheads, um, which aren't. I mean, those aren't very notable in any sense because you just attack them twice, and I think their only attack is to rush you.
Yeah.
So it's kind of just whoever attacks first wins.
Mm,
Hmm.
yeah.
Um, but in Elden Volcano, that's a quote unquote stealth section, or just a section where you have to avoid enemies. Um, so you're not fighting them there too much either. And in Lanayru Desert, it's a bit of an auto scrolling segment where a time shift stone is attached to a minecart, and um, you have to follow the minecart, which means staying within proximity of the time shift stone, which will um, in turn revive and kill enemies.
They keep that last one you mentioned, where they still keep like recontextualizing the enemies. And even in the horde, it's like the whole set piece of you're fighting a ton of them now. You're fighting them in greater numbers that have ever occurred in the game. Even that's still new. I guess in as far as the, because even now I'm only like retroactively realizing this. Now that Daniel's brought it up, but you do notice throughout the game that you fight a lot of those red bokoblins basically.
Oh yeah.
And sure, you can say that it's your basic enemy. The basic enemy. It's like complaining about, oh, there's too many Koopas in Mario. It's like it's not much of a criticism. But I do agree with the sentiment that the variation among the enemies and among combat. I think that's the one where it's like, yeah, that that's the one that I'm more inclined to
Mm.
uh, to agree with.
I remember Jonathan did a pretty detailed review of the second Elden Volcano dungeon. I think it's the Fire Sanctuary. And he talked about how uh, so many enemy setups within the dungeon were just identical. And I think that's one thing that hurts Skyward Sword is that because the enemies are so dedicated and focused, like Daniel said, um, and because the amount of enemies is not that high, um, the game just throws the same setup at you over and over.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just I don't. I think it's just virtue of the fact that of the inherent nature of a one-on-one sword fighting duel, for which many of the uh, enemy encounters in Skyward Sword are. By virtue of having that, you can't easily inject a lot of dynamic elements or layering of enemies because in sword fighting duel it's one on one, and any of the other enemies that are around you um, are simply distractions, and you'd have to sort of shift between them, which isn't which may or may not be good for the game's clarity and communication. I think just by virtue of it being focused on one-on-one sword fighting, the design space doesn't have a lot of areas in which to expand or elements um, that can lay in with it, and so it's just the nature of the beast, really. It's just by choosing to go down that route, that's just the implication of that kind of design.
Hmm.
Although that there are still some sort of dynamic elements, like this, like the time shift stone thing is potentially one of those. But I don't think that the more layered counterpoint style of enemy design really happens in Skyward Sword. I think from what I understand, that's more of a Breath of the Wild thing where you've got sort of open setups, you've got very dynamic, interconnected elements, and so that's more of a Breath of the Wild thing.
I think by and large, Daniel, you're right. And more the exception to prove the rule would be Lizalfos, where they'll block your or Lizalfos wears. I'm trying to think of the name for it, but basically they wear armor on their arms, on one of their arms,
Mm,
and you'll
mm,
frequently encounter two together, one wearing armor on his right arm, one wearing armor on his left arm. And they'll be jumping around you, going into different patterns at different intervals. Um, and so that's like the only time where I really felt there was meaningful counterpoint because I would want to set up the Lizalfos in a certain way where uh, I hit the one that I want to hit, and like it's meaningful if they're standing with their armor pieces facing each other or their armor pieces facing apart. And so I kind of want to lead them around and get them in a favorable position. And if one's blocking, I want to make sure I hit him while the other isn't trying to attack me. Um, I think in general, probably just you could probably write, uh, a decent essay just about how interesting that counterpoint is. But that's really the only time it happens in the game.
So what I was gonna get at is that I kind of disagree about the dual nature limiting the design space.
mhm,
Well, it's not that I do disagree because there are moments, as Greg mentioned, and I don't actually think it's the exception. It's just more uncommon because for whatever reason they just didn't put them that often in the game. Because there are some standout examples, like there's this purple room in the Skykeep Temple where there's just a ton of enemies. There's guys standing on these perches shooting arrows at you. Uh, you have your a bunch of bokoblins in the room, and then these skeletons where once you run near them, Stalfos become animated, and then you're fighting Stalfos at the same time fighting bokoblin, at the same time having bokoblin archers shooting at you, and it's like I don't think Skyward Sword has
mhm,
a problem with multi-enemy encounters. I mean, what the
mhm,
first one you have when you land on the ground is you fight five bokoblins at the same time, and although some of their AI is like a little questionable, where they just get bored and start walking off. I don't know why they do that, but that's what they do. Um, we see it in that room, in the fight in the Horde with the Lizalfos, certain other like very specific moments that I remember. Like there's like the one where you're delivering the big jar of water, and there's just a bunch of enemies that you have to fight along the way. That's another one. That's like basically I'm saying I don't think it's as limiting on the design space. I think the one that
mm,
does make it a bit trickier is the directional guarding, which does more or less force you to aim your strikes more. Although I believe, as
mm.
Greg noticed, what is it that they're a little sloppier with their guarding when you're not locked on?
So I did some playing around, and I think what it boils down to is when you lock onto an enemy, kind of like Sakura Samurai, actually. When you lock onto an enemy, they're
Yeah, I was
very
going to say
polite.
that one too. Haha.
They're very polite and hold up, I've got my butcher knife on my right side, So you got to hit me from my left. But if Link just walks off center and he puts his butcher knife up in the right place, well, if you're a couple pixels over, you're gonna surprise him by hitting him out of a completely stupid angle. So it's not that they're sloppy; it's more that they're rigid and can't adapt to you screwing around.
Mm. And there's like that sort of that bit of freedom, I guess, in that you can break that, their rigid behaviors as well. I think maybe another example of that is where I was saying before how when you do combat, you take your sword out, and if you walk, if you're not locked on and you walk past like a Bobakin, and then you quickly lock on and pull your sword out and strike before it's actually in that sort of behavior, you can also get them catch them off guard there as well. Is that sort of an example of, well, another sort of example of what you mean, Greg?
Yeah, exactly.
Hmm. Okay. On the on the purple room, yeah, I totally agree. I think that's a really good. Um, I guess sort of my uh, the way I'd slice it is I'd say that the nature of the camera being, locked on to another enemy and being focused on that one enemy, and the player's ability in that situation to see elements on the periphery,
Hmm.
um, and the fact that they also have to respond to what's happening directly in front of them. I guess those aspects limit the potential of the of what can be done with that sort of combat system. In saying that, though, what you've said, yeah, is absolutely right. But then I think at that point in the game, that's probably about as far as you can take it. Like you probably couldn't put in anything. You couldn't probably uh, create such a layered encounter without then negatively affecting the balance of the clarity of gameplay overall.
Yeah, Adrian, you yourself said that because this is Skyward Sword, enemies aren't polite and will hit you, you know, will backstab you.
Hmm. Yeah.
So I feel like
Uh,
that's a comment on how the gameplay loses clarity when they try to layer stuff too much.
I mean, you typically see the enemies that you're always about to fight. So in the horde, when I get hit off the side by the blue bokoblin, it's like, well, yeah, it's generally speaking, it is your job to keep view of the enemies you're fighting. Another example is Stallmaster when he has these little zombie bokoblins come up. It's still,
Mm,
your responsibility to, you know, be aware of your surroundings and keep view of the other enemies in the fight.
Okay.
mm,
That the enemies can hit you behind the back, I don't think is a an example of how the design space is more limited. I think that's just par for the course because the same holds true for the other 3D Zeldas, minus Ocarina of Time and more Joe's Mask, where they just didn't do that. But in Wind
mm,
Waker, you could very easily have an enemy come and hit you in the back, but and you still just had to, deal with it.
mm,
Even with the camera being much, I don't want to say looser, but it's not quite as behind your back as it is in Skyward Sword. But that aspect was still there. Of there are still enemies off screen. You still have to play with that in mind. And it's the same true with even a top-down Zelda. It's like, yeah, an enemy can still be off screen, and you still have to keep aware of them. I mean, the clarity
mm.
is of course, still there because it's top-down, but it holds no. The screen can only show so much going on at one time, so enemies being off the screen to me is just not a big deal.
I mean, I guess Skyward Sword, Skyward Sword's combat challenges are designed such that they're um, it never really is. Well, enemies being off screen never really becomes a problem anyway. Like if we look at the Bobokins, they if they are if there are several of them at once, it's not like they just sort of spread and move around. Like they all sort of circle you. They all sort of stand just to the left or the right of each other. It's not like they, you know, three or four, well, let's say two or three of them, sort of sneak behind you or anything like that. Like they all sort of work in a way that there's a half circle around you that you can orientate in. So, um, yeah, I guess it's not really a problem in Skyward Sword because it's um, the layering and the positioning of enemies um, isn't tuned in a way that it would be problematic. Whereas another action game, it's not as well tuned and clean.
Yeah, I guess another point that I would add is that even if they did do that, where they would
Mm-hmm.
like literally try to swarm and get around you behind your back, you could still see it because I mean there is still that little bit of camera space to where you see an enemy come in because that's how the so again they can still tune it right because that's how the zombie bokoblin were tuned to where you can see just a little bit, not just a little bit, you can see them get in the camera behind you just before they do their grab animation. So even enemies coming at you behind your back, if tuned like the way they did with that enemy, still not that big a deal.
Yeah, sure.
I
The
think,
other thing too is that it's not like the gameplay or the game speed isn't that like fast as well. Like
yeah,
it's sort of it's slow enough that you can manage the things that are around you.
yeah, the bokoblins are generally enemies that they do not attack very frequently. I mean, they still attack, but they're never gonna. It's like you'll never encounter a moment where three of them are attacking at the same time in different directions. That doesn't
Mm.
happen. The game is still tuned to keep that from happening, which to me is the thing you really want to be more concerned with is enemies just putting you in straight up impossible situations that aren't like you backed up against the wall. If that's one thing, but if it's just like I'm just fighting these guys and I got put in a space that I couldn't get out of, then that's when it becomes a real problem.
Should we choose our favorite enemy? Because I think at this point, like we're just sort of talking about degrees of clarity, so or degrees of design space.
Oh,
Um,
there was one thing that I had
uh-huh.
left.
Yep.
So the one thing that I had left was that it could be possible that because of those issues where they still didn't want that to happen again, that's why they had enemies set up more by themselves and kept those moments where they layered them much less frequent. I still think that the moments like in the purple room like less because I mean when you first encounter that that's a pretty like intense room that I died several times just trying to get through. But those moments could have still been just peppered out throughout the game to where your only multi-enemy encounters aren't just bokoblins with other bokoblins. It could be bokoblins with Keys, bokoblins with Beamos, bokoblins with an Armos, bokoblins with a bokoblin that throws a bomb, bokoblins that throw bokoblins with a slingshot, bokoblins with, Dekubabas or whatever, or moblins with Lizalfos. You could have had all sorts of variations that literally just don't exist in the game. Like that last one I just listed right there, never happens. And I don't think it's
Mm.
because it would have played oddly. I just think it's because I don't know. It just feels like they kind of
It's sort of like they didn't realize that until too late.
yeah, it's they didn't realize that till too late, or they never want to make anything too hard, or
Mm. Mm.
because there is something. I don't buy that either because that purple room says that oh yeah we are willing to make it that hard, but I just don't
Mm.
understand it.
There are some, uh, not that there's a lot of this, but there are some situations where they offset enemies with, I guess, quote unquote, environmental challenges. Um,
Hmm.
there are uh, keys that can curse you in the Skykeep, um, in the room where you're trying to open up water bubbles to create platforms on magma. So if you get cursed, then you can't use your items to open up water bubbles. Therefore, your timing windows get a lot tighter. Um, there's also another setup with the Ampelus, the snail enemy, where you kill it and then it creates a platform for you over the quicksand. Those are the only
Hmm.
two times I can think of, but it's not just enemy plus enemy setups. There's also some enemy plus environment setups.
Yeah, that's right, and that goes into the sort of the level enemy variation.
Yeah, and Skyward Sword definitely does that quite a bit, as Greg just listed out. I guess to wrap things up with what I was saying about Skyward Sword is that why I don't think the motion controls necessarily limited to science space is because the primary action still is just moving around, picking your targets, hitting things. So you can still alleviate that by just not having the directions necessary to slash being too strict. So while the directional guarding of enemies does can limit it to more of those one-on-one interactions with maybe a couple of other enemies on the side. I still think if they just had a couple more like the moblins, because it doesn't matter which way you swing. If a moblin doesn't have a shield, any direction works, and you can get more of those standard enemy setups that you would see in other 3D Zeldas. Anyways,
Mm.
favorite enemies.
No, no,
Unless you guys have comments on that.
oh, sorry, I was just gonna say, yeah, I think your points. How can I say? I really agree with your points, and I feel like I need to think a lot more. Um, I have to go back and play it, and to really reconsider my stance, I guess. Mm. I mean, but I think ultimately what we're talking about is sort of degrees at this point. So, um, yeah, I think for enemies, how about we do this? How about we can choose either favorite enemy, favorite boss, or favorite setup because
Oh,
we're
that's a
talking
good
about
one.
some layered situations.
Yeah. Oh man, it's so easy for me to pick up like three of each category.
Okay. Well, I might go first because I'm already talking. So, I reckon probably I'll just choose two. I reckon the Dreadfuse and Squirvo, in the Star Force, like all those one-on-one sword fighting encounters in a limited space. Probably Dreadfuse, I think, is my favorite, um, because it's on like you're pretty much walking the plank, I guess you'd say, and that your movement range is very narrow, and it's highly focused, and I like the mix-ups, and it's very, I guess, for me as a player, I really like the sort of not stricter challenges, but the very challenges that are extremely clear and explicit. And so I quite enjoyed that. And as I said before, I liked Coloctus as a boss battle because with all the bits flying everywhere, it feels very dynamic, and I love the use. I felt that they could have made better use of the whip in general combat environments. Like it kind of reminded me of the grapple in Metroid Prime 3, and although that wasn't used quite like it wasn't used all the time, like it was used to say rip off enemy shields and things like that. And I'm a bit disappointed that Skyward Sword didn't make better use of um, that mechanic. But in Coloctus, I thought it was used very well. So they're my favorite two.
Yeah, now that you bring that up, I don't think we can get into it here because we could probably have one on items since we've already been talking for an hour and a half. But yeah, I did too notice that the whip was a little underwhelming. It was not as useful as I thought it was going to be. Greg, favorites.
Um, well, uh, I mean, my favorite enemy and my favorite setup, I already mentioned, is the Lizalfos plus Lizalfos. Um, just because uh, I think that really hit that sweet spot for me where um, in some rooms, like in the purple room in the Skykeep, it was just too much going on for me to really. Um, if you imagine that graph of flow, that was in the upper portion where it was too much going on, and I was just frustrated. Um, whereas with the Lizalfos, it was just interesting enough that like I had a good understanding of each individual's behaviors, and so there's that. Um, Whenever I was focusing on one, some part of me was still thinking about what the other one might be doing, uh, and I was still trying to figure out like how to get them to do what I want. Um, yeah, so I think the Lizalfos in particular just hit that sweet spot, especially when the two of them were layered together. Um, my favorite boss uh, would, well, I already talked about the Moldarok, so my second favorite boss would be the final Girahim fight, and
Wait,
just because
which Girahim fight?
the final one,
Oh, okay, okay.
just because his earlier fights are interesting because you have to he'll read where you have the sword placed and block. Um, so you kind of have to maneuver your sword away from his hand before you can strike back. And so I thought that was a interesting way of implementing the directional sword play. But the final Girahim, um, it takes it in a less strict direction where um, he'll have very clear openings. Uh, for instance, when he's doing the deadly plunge or whatever, um, he just he holds up two purple balls and says, "Okay, you can't use any vertical slashes, otherwise I'm going to hit you, but you're free to use anything horizontal." Um, and then there's the phase where he holds up his sword and you have to like chop it away, which is more or less the same thing, um, just with a different visual cue, because you need to slash adjacent to his sword. Um, so anyway, the gist of it is, I liked that the final Girahim fight um, made me use my sword in different directions.
Alright, I guess now it's my turn. Favorite boss, you probably already guessed, is Demise. I just loved that epic sword fight with him, and just how fast you can take him on, as well as the interplay you can have with him when we introduce the lightning Skyward Strike in there. My favorite setup, as you can guess, was the purple room, because you go through those two Iron Shield moblins, and then you go through the room with the skeletons all around with the Archer Bokoblins and the Stalfos and the regular Bokoblins, and I thought that was really cool. A close second is the Horde. But the surprising one is my favorite enemy. It's a Skulltula.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah, because it is an example where you really get to see the uniqueness of the sword because it's a physics-based enemy where the direction of the swing impacts how it starts swinging around. And if you start spinning him, how you can still stab his weak point as he's spinning around, which is such a unique, dynamic, interesting challenge that you could not get with the standard swing. Not even in Breath of the Wild, which goes crazy with the physics. You still could not get that kind of interaction in that game, not without motion controls. So hands down, Skulltula, just him on the little web, bouncing around, awesome, A plus. And of course, he's still an interesting enemy in the ground because you can still knock him around like he's a ball.
Oh yeah, you can flip him over too.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
real.
wow.
It has real dimensionality, that fight. And it sort of reminds me how like in Mario Galaxy, like when you're pointing at the screen and then you're sort of shooting something into the screen, how like it's moving into the screen. But in this sense, it feels like you're when it's sort of swinging back and I mean not just like left and right, but into and away from from Link. It and then you then attack it. It's almost like you're reaching into the screen.
yeah. And I guess second place would be that cactus because it can actually still hurt you, but it's another like I mean, that should have been an enemy, like a little Wobbuffet looking enemy or something, where it just you swing the sword and it bounces around like that. Those cactuses were fun. I miss those cactuses.
So what? Cactus? You mean the what? The froak?
Nope, I do actually mean the cactuses in Lanayru Desert.
Like
Oh, okay, yep,
weebles
yeah, I know
wobble,
what
but
you
they
mean.
don't.
Yep.
Hmm
Yeah.
they
Yes,
swing
yeah,
around like
cool.
a upside down pendulum when you hit them. It's
Mm.
awesome.
I think you can actually use the whip on them to whip out like a heart from the flower.
I I might have stumbled upon that, but I did not know that. I would always have to hit them, and then when they came all the way down, hit the flower with my sword to get the heart out of it. I didn't know you could do that.
I think you can. Well, at least you can use the bow and arrow and shoot it.
Anyways, this was a unexpectedly long conversation just about the combat and Skyward Sword, and even getting a little bit into the core of action games. So next time, planning to get talking on level design. As usual, thank you both for joining me.
No troubles.
Yeah, my pleasure.
It's been good.
Nice.